Is it good? Okay. Okay, sorry, I have to interrupt, but we need to start the last session. Can you please take a seat?
Excuse me.
Thank you. Okay, so this is the last effort of the day. Well, actually, we have the party still, so don't use all the energy now, okay? So just my recommendation. Okay, so this last session is about governance models for EOSC post 2027. So you have heard during the day that some progress has been made in that perspective over the past months. So today, for the first time, we want to present to you the progress that we have done on this topic. I remind you that we still are using the Slido. So for questions, both online and in person, participants use the Slido. And then I would like to call on stage the speakers for this session. Michel Scuppe from European Commission, Volker Beckmann, the co-chair of the EOSC steering board, and Karel Leuben, president of the EOSC Association. So we will start immediately with a presentation of Michel that will give us the overall picture of the work that has been done and where we are at the moment. Michel, please.
Thank you, Sarah, and good afternoon again. I'm happy to discuss with you this very important subject of the future governance of EOSC after 2027. Why 2027? Because at that time we will have a new framework program to be launched. We have to prepare this 10th framework program in advance, so in the coming years. So we have to know what kind of proposal the tripartite governance of today of EOSC would like to propose for the future. Can I have the next slide, please? Maybe I can do it myself, right? Okay. Oops. Okay, so to understand the whole process, it's important to understand the evolution of the EOSC governance since inception. So you probably all know that the EOSC initiative has been launched in 2015, 2016. At that time, the Commission came with a vision through a European Cloud Initiative. It was a communication. We had a roadmap for the EOSC implementation, which was in the form of a staff working document, so that's purely EC terminology. And we came with some targeted resourcing through Horizon 2020 at that time to fund a series of grants. And I must say that there was already a community who did express interest towards this new initiative, what we call the community of EOSC doers. But this was mainly driven by the Commission, I would say, and very quickly we recognized that EOSC should not be a project from Brussels, just to quote one of my previous head of unit, Jean-Claude Burgelman, who you might know. So, but it should be a community-driven process with a gradual implementation and based on mutual alignment. So this is why we thought, yes, we need to develop step-by-step a multi-stakeholder approach to develop and implement the EOSC. So what happened in 2019 and 2020? There was what we called an interim EOSC governance for 2 years, a rather short period of time, which was based on a governance board with the member states and the Commission, based on an executive board involving key stakeholders within the European research community, and some of them are present in this room. And this executive board developed several working groups to address strategic issues for the EOSC implementation. I would not say that this governance has been steering the implementation in that period of time. I think it was mainly steering and preparing for the next governance after 2020. If we look at what those working groups have been delivered, it was quite a lot of information. All of this has been published, and you will see from the titles of those reports from 2020 that the issues discussed at that time remains the issues we are discussing nowadays. So ranging from the architecture of EOSC to the PID policy to the interoperability framework and so on and so on. So we already had some milestones, brainstorming and reports on what the policy should be. And I would say all this has been inspiring a strategic research and innovation agenda for the period 21 till 2030, which is actually our compass for the EOSC European partnership of today. So we have transitioned from a phase one, where many things have been driven by the Commission on its own, to a phase two, which is still ongoing, where we have a partnership approach. And this answers this request to have a multi-stakeholder approach to implement the EOSC. As I said, it's driven by a common vision, which is set in the Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda, and it is implemented still mainly through calls for proposals. Currently, cash funding is still coming from the EU, but the way we defined priorities and the way we define goals is a multi-stakeholder approach. So now we are taking into account of a multi-annual roadmap coming from the EOSC Association. So extremely important in the transition was the setup of the EOSC Association, because this was a way to structure the voice of the research community, as explained this morning by Klaus Tochtermann. So I would say in this second phase of EOSC, we have a more structured engagement of a wider community via the EOSC Association. We have an increased convergence of activities at European, national, and institutional levels, especially in the context of using this EOSC strategic agenda as a common compass. And we are co-programming the priorities and the way EU funding will be spent together with the EOSC Association in the context of the partnership. But still, cash funding is limited to the EU. Although this is complemented by additional activities provided by the members of the EOSC Association. So this is a big change from phase one, and now we are discussing phase three. So what will happen after 2027, and how should we evolve? I'm going to skip this slide. I always put too many slides in my presentation. I try to reach the next one. Yes. And I would say we have now a new challenge compared to phase 1 and 2, which is that we have to transition from prototyping the EOSC to operating an EOSC shared infrastructure. So funding research grants that produce knowledge should go on, but this is not sufficient anymore. We now have to enter operations and production. And this has an impact on what the governance should be in the period post-2027. So we had some reflection at the level of the tripartite governance, and we co-defined 5 main tasks to be implemented for this EOSC post-2027. Task 1 and 2 very much relates to this operational challenge that we have. So deploying and operating the EOSC EU node, and we have talked a lot about it already today in several sessions, but also from this node onwards to expand the EOSC Federation, something which is not really tackled so far. Then we have 3 other types of tasks that are very much R&I type of tasks. Continuous action to enable a web of fair data and services for science. So all the FAIR agenda, the verification of research data, and all kinds of research digital objects. We have task 5, which is about enabling open science policies and the uptake of open science practices. We are improving in this field. We are monitoring progress, but clearly this is an action which is long-standing, and we will need to do further efforts after 2027. And we have task 4, which is about developing, prototyping new elements that could be then incubated into the future EOSC core and the future EOS marketplace. So 5 tasks. We know how they are tackled today. This is the middle column of this slide. And we are wondering how we should tackle them in the future after 2027. I would say so far, with the discussion we had with both the EOSC Association and the member states through the EOSC Steering Board, we can see some features that we need to address with this governance. There is a general willingness to have a more streamlined governance model after 2027, which would be based on the tripartite collaboration that we have initiated since about 2 years. We would like to have a higher level of integration and synchronization of all these activities related to the EOSC being done at European, national, or institutional level. We would like to have a governance that can engage with research infrastructures in Europe in terms of operations, for instance, but also with all kinds of research performing organizations across the research landscape in Europe. There is a real need and wish by the member states to have a stronger participation, because in the current EOSC co-program partnership that we have, this is based on a memorandum of understanding between the Commission and the EOSC Association, but the member states are not really in a driving seat in this partnership, so this is something that would probably evolve in the future. Flexibility matters as well, so integration, yes, but flexibility, because if some member states would position themselves to co-finance elements of EOSC, they would like to do this in a flexible way. I mean, budgets have many constraints in the countries, so the size of the budget, the time when you come with a budget contribution from a country, all these things should be somehow flexible, and the governance should be able to adapt to these constraints. And finally, but not leastly, we have investigated several scenarios. There are many options actually on the table. Each of them is quite complex and can be implemented in many ways. But what can be seen so far is that there is a big interest towards considering an external entity to do either all of the 5 tasks that have been defined, and that's what we could call an integrated scenario, or only part of those tasks, the rest remaining done through the framework program number 10, the one that is coming next. And that would be called the hybrid scenario. So I think this is my last slide, but I think the next speakers will dig into what is this integrated scenarios, what are the constraints and features attached to this integrated scenario, and also the hybrid scenario. With this, I thank you very much.
Thank you, Michel, for this introduction. And indeed, I'm the next speaker talking about the integrated scenario. Can I please have the slides? And the timer, please. Okay. So again, what do we mean by integrated scenario? With the term integrated scenario, we mean that all the 5 tasks that you have seen on Michelle's slide will be implemented via indirect management by an external entity, meaning that a single organization will be in charge for the operation, but also the development of the EOSC TRIA post-2027. These scenarios are mainly based on the use of grants and/or procurement as part of the legal entity's work program. So that's, let's say, our definition of integrated scenario. There are different options on how this integrated scenario can materialize. One option is to implement the task via an Article 185 with the establishment of a new private law body with a public service mission, including member state organizations. And I have one slide for each of this model to go a little bit in depth into the model. The second option is, again, an integrated scenario implemented via an Article 187, for example, a joint undertaking. The last option is having all these tasks implemented with a private law body with a public service mission. So similar to the Article 185, but just an independent body. So let's try to dig into these scenarios. And I'm sorry, I need to change the microphone because I cannot see the slides. So can you, thanks. I'm gonna sit here. Okay. So the first scenario is the Article 185, also called public-to-public partnership. When does this implementation model is usually used? So typically, the focus of this of the Article 185 is on major long-term strategic challenges and priorities beyond the period of a single framework program, where a collective action is necessary and where there is a very complex ecosystem. So you might think that this applies to EOSC indeed. This scenario needs to be, let's say, proposed by the European Commission, and when there is a need for a dedicated implementation structure. And in this new structure, the participation of the member states is mandatory. And there is also an obligation that 40% of the member states need to be committed to be part of this new structure. The interesting aspect is this model allows to merge and the research and innovation efforts from the Union and the member states. This clearly means that high political commitment from the highest level in the Ministries of Science, Research and Innovation is needed to be able to establish this model. The legal basis is a decision of the European Parliament and Council, so you understand that this means that lots of preparation needs to be done in order to establish this model, and also the new potential structure is subject to an ex-ante assessment. So it's not something that we can establish from one day to the other. So this new structure requires quite a lot of effort for the establishment. There is also commitment, not only political but financial, from the member states. And there will be, in this model, annual work programs for activities to be implemented by this new structure, clearly subject to the European Commission approval. The typical governance model for this is a General Assembly with participation from the countries, and the European Commission is just an observer. And then there are scientific advisory boards, and for example, you can think that in the EOS context, that's where the community might have a role in this model. And then there is an operational management unit. So these are the characteristics of the Article 185. If we go to the Article 187,
Also, this article is particularly or typically used for initiatives where there is some technological development and demonstration programs. Probably the most common example here is the EuroHPC joint undertaking. It's foreseen for activities where other forms of European partnership are not considered suitable for the purpose, and is justifiable only if there is a long-term perspective and high-level degree of integration, okay? Just to clarify, the long-term commitment is expected much larger than for any other option in this one. So this is the joint undertaking is really the model for the long-term commitment approach. It allows the integration of national and union funding, like the Article 185, and calls can be launched that everyone can apply to the calls launched by a joint undertaking. It can include all different types of partners, differently from the previous article. So Article 185, we have only the member states and the Commission as an observer. In the joint undertaking, private partners can join. So you could think, for example, that the EOSC Association might be one of the private partners joining, because also foundations are, for example, allowed. The financial commitment is similar to Article 185. Also in this case, I mean, instead of talking about annual work programs that are there, we are also talking about strategic research and innovation roadmap. Again, it's a very integrated model and for research and innovation and joint development. And the governance in this case, we have a governing board, usually with 50% of the voting rights are for the European Commission. Another level of engagement, potentially, of the community in this model is through a scientific advisory board. One of the, let's say, interesting aspects of the joint undertaking, and that's why probably is one of the models of the table, is the potential benefit from VAT and excise duties on the purchases in all the member states, and also the fact that it might adopt procurement procedures not subject to the directive on public procurement. So when we talk about transnational access or sharing, maybe this could be an interesting aspect. The last model, it's, as I said below, the establishment of a single external organization being responsible for ensuring management, financial and scientific integration. So we have still one integrated model. The difference is that this organization, this new legal entity, is established in one of the member states. So it's also subject to the national law where it is established. Also in this case, the option is to allow for co-financing from the European Union, but also the member states for all the tasks. Because the organization will be entrusted with the European budget, so there will be also an assessment, also in this case. So the message here is that also in this case, it's not something that can be established tomorrow, because the legal entity is entrusted with budget, so it takes time. Clearly, the idea behind this one single organization is that the participating states and the European Commission will play a role in the governance and in the decision making. This structure, potential structure, could ensure probably a more user-centric and community-driven approach, because, for example, this could be a membership-based organization, so the different members could be representatives of the communities, like today is the association. Well, and clearly the role of this legal entity will be to ensure or manage the EOSC compliance framework, enforcing common policies, and so on. This slide is just, you have all the models mapped on some of the characteristics, but just to say that clearly one of the advantage, or the main advantage of the integrated model is really to having clearly defined management rules and also accountability. And clearly also sustainability becomes a little bit easier, if you want, because high commitment, both for political and financial, is requested at the start, okay? You can also see the differences in the models in terms of participation of the member states. So we have more flexible participation with the JU and a private law body, otherwise there is an obligation. And then you can see also the decision-making, how is organized. My last slide, just with preliminary reflection. So relying on a single organization is the best approach to avoid coordination issues and overheads, because we have just one legal entity in charge for everything, an integrated R&I program or development. The integrated scenario, as I said, now ensures a clearly defined management structure and also accountability. The integrated scenario, in particular Article 185 and 187, require strong financial and political commitment. This means, from one side, long-term sustainability and commitment, but on the other side, also very high costs for establishment and also for the implementation and the setup of the new entity. So we need to take this into account. And finally, just the final remark on the potential alternative for managing the current issues that we have with VATs and other stuff. Okay, so that was my last slide on the integrated scenarios. Now I would like to pass the floor to Volker, that is gonna present us another option, that is an hybrid scenario.
Thank you. Can I have the slides, please? So you thought this was already complex. Now we ramp it up a bit. We make it a hybrid scenario. This means we mix direct management. So part is directly managed by the European Commission, as we have seen in the current setup. And part is directly managed, is indirectly managed by an external entity. So in the hybrid model we describe in the document so far, and it will be slightly different from the hybrid model that Karel is going to discuss. So we think of task 1 and 2, which is the EOSC EU node, as implemented by an external entity. So, and tasks 3, 4, and 5 to be implemented through a continued EOS European co-program partnership. So this part would be, as you know it, there's something like Horizon Infra EOSC, where you can apply, where the development is done. There's a tripartite governance, which is deciding on that, and they are also defining something like the SRIA then, and the roadmap for how to move forward. So it's a combination of indirect management by an external entity, and we are not saying this is the EOSC association. I come to this point in a moment. It can be the EOSC association in a developed form, and the European Commission still has a very important role here. So what we have in this model also, as in the previous models, is a much stronger engagement of the member states and associated countries, because the task 1 and 2 are going to be financed by the member states together with the European Commission, and there's also the possibility for co-fund actions, for example, in task number 4. So there are 3 conditions which would be required to ensure continuous operation and expansion of the EOSC EU node. So there has to be an agreement between the participating countries and the European Commission to co-finance task 1 and 2. So typically this is a 50-50 budget. And this agreement shall be finalized as early as possible, because we have to have this in place before we start FP10. So this means there's an agreement on this budget before the next framework program. The budget will be available and would guarantee the operation of the EOSC EU node over the duration of the next framework program, which means that we get rid of this uncertainty. What happens after this project? What happens after procurement? And so on. We would also need at the same time, of course, somebody to execute that, the external entity. So also this entity has to be created or identified before the start of FP10. So this could be a repurposed existing entity, so for example, the association, or a new tailor-made one, because it is very specific, right? You have to run this EOSC EU node. At the same time, you have to be able to for example, launch a procurement to buy certain services, and so on. And then, of course, there's also this pillar-assessed aspect, so that there's some some kind of control of what this external entity is doing. So for task 3 to 5, they would remain under direct management of the EC, for example, with a co-program partnership with a tripartite governance. So we have a similar setup as now, Commission, a body representing the member states, and an external entity voicing the interest of the research community in Europe. So this could, for example, also be the continuation of the EOSC association. So we could have also a complementary action there, for example, co-funding of some EOSC actions between the EU and the participating states. This, as Giorgio said, this has, of course, an implication on how much the countries would have to put in, right? If there's a co-fund action, means again additional money which has to come from the countries. But it means also a more strong involvement of the countries and being more in the driver's seat. So there's also a certain interest by some countries to go into this direction. So one of the weaker points, perhaps, or of the challenges of this model is that you have to have a coordination between task 1 and 2, the EOSC EU node, and 3 to 5. So, and you could even imagine that the external entity, which is running the EOSC EU node, is not the same one as in this tripartite governance, because there you want to have all the communities like you have now in the EOSC association, whereas for the EU node, you might want to have something a bit more focused on the task at hand. So then this would mean that you need recommendations by the external entity in charge of the EU node, identifying what could be done, proposing something, and then this has to be taken up by the EOS Partnership Board, creating an SRIA, writing a MAR, and so on. So, the key aspects here, just to take away, for the EU node, an external entity which has to be chosen before or at the start of FP10, an agreement between the member states and the Commission on the budget before FP10 and fully committed for the whole duration of FP10. And the external entity has to be able also to provide grants to beneficiaries and launch procurements in order to do their job. And for the task, the more development tasks, the enabling EOSC and the policies, we would continue with a work program, for example, under a co-program partnership with a tripartite governance. And the external entity does not necessarily have to be the same as for running the EU node. And what I like here is you could continue with the in-kind contributions, for example, by the EOSC association partners to this work. So, and I think that's what I wanted to say. I still have 3 minutes.
Yeah, well done. You recover my delay. Yes. Okay, so we have heard from Volker one option for a potential hybrid scenario, and now Karel is going to give us another view of an hybrid model, especially that represents the view of the EOSC Association Board.
Thank you, Sarah, and nice to be in the opportunity to give the view of the EOSC Association Board. Volker was joking at the beginning of this session, we leave the best option to the end, and I fully agree with him, of course. He also was saying that this is slightly different than the option he described of the hybrid model. It is indeed a hybrid model, but I would not say it's slightly different, it's quite different. In 2021, June 2021, we presented this slide as the tasks for the EOSC Association to see to. We are supposed to see to it that we reach out to stakeholders, that we manage the trademark, that we monitor the additional activities and the KPIs, and that we contribute to the Horizon Europe era actions, which we all do. On that slide, it also said that we would further develop and govern the, what at that time was called MEV, Minimum Viable EOSC, that we would see to it that the AAI was managed and the PID policies were managed, and that the management of the interoperability framework would be taken care of, as well as the management of the compliance framework. These 5 tasks have not been done by the association because it has been not in the position to do these tasks. And our suggestion is that in the future, maybe the association or another legal entity could be in the position to take these tasks under their supervision, not necessarily to do the tasks themselves. This is a slide from Michel, as he has shown. These are the 5 tasks. I don't have to repeat them now again because they have been repeated several times. And this is what it is, the situation today, as he also showed. And in the future, there is the question, how will we deal with these tasks on which we agree are the most important tasks to be done? If we compare slide 2 of 2 years ago and slide 3, the slide from Michel, then at this moment, as I said, the EOSC Association is handling the first 4 bullets, but not the 5 bullets after that, which we can, let's say, are similar, not identical, but to a large extent with the tasks 1, 2, and 4 on the slide of Michel. The EOSC Association proposes to start implementing these tasks either as an association or as a lot of other legal entity in the new governance period after 2027. And this leads to what we call option E on the list of options, because on the list of options there is the option 0 that has not been mentioned, but that's basically the baseline option that the whole system continues as it is, where the Commission runs everything more or less in Framework 10. Option A, integrated scenario presented by Sarah. Option B, again an integrated scenario presented by Sarah. Option C, an integrated scenario with a private legal body, a law body, sorry, for the public service mission. Option D, just presented by Volker, a hybrid model where you combine 1 and 2 and combine 3, 4, and 5. And we added option E, the scenario where you combine 1, 2, and 4, combining the development with the operation and implementing this, having this implemented by an external entity that is entrusted to do this, and combining task 3 and 5, which actually are tasks that are worldwide. Creating the web of fair data and services is not a task for Europe alone. This is a task for all the continents to work together and to create this worldwide web of fair data. And task 5, providing an open science attitude and, let's say, making open science the new normal, is also a much wider task than the task of running the EOSC node. So we would propose task 3 and 5 to be combined in an open science program from the European Commission, either run by a partnership or just a program as part of the Framework 10 program. So what is our proposal? Combine tasks 1, 2, and 4 by an entrusted legal entity. Take task 3 and 5 into an open science program in the future in Framework 10. How would we finance this? In our view, the EOSC node created by and procured by the European Commission should be financed by the European Union for the time being. Other EOSC nodes in the countries, the research infrastructures very often have nodes already, can be financed by these countries and by the parties that are financing them already. That makes life simpler because the money of the countries stays in the countries. And also the discussion on financing across the borders becomes less complicated as the integration of the development with the running of the operation becomes less complicated because that's done by the same organization. So the governance initially in what we call EOSC A 2.0 could be the similar governance as we have now, a tripartite governance, stakeholders represented by the EOSC Association, the countries involved and the Commission involved. But later on, in a what we call EOSC A 3.0 version, we could have the EOSC nodes as representations in the EOSC Association General Assembly in order to govern the system. Considerations are, for us, who does the operations, who does the development, how about the implementation of the federated structure, Who sets the rules of participation? Who suggests the standards, tools, and services? What about the fair evaluator? The improvement of the interoperability board that could be there. How do we seek alignment with the other parts of the world, and what is the legal entity entrusted to operate this and to run grants? Suggested answers, EOSC Association, or in more general terms, the legal entity entrusted with this could be responsible but could outsource the operation. It would be running the development through grants, and that could be done by the association with money from the European Union. Implementing the federated structure, this has to be done together with the EOSC nodes. The EOSC nodes that comes, for example, from the research infrastructure, which I think is a very important group of low-hanging fruits to, let's say, start EOSC nodes, is an important group to be involved in creating this federated structure. Rules of participation, yes, they should be set, and I think we could do this job in the future. Not today. We don't have the money for it, we don't have the people for it, we don't have the knowledge for it, but I'm talking about the future after 2027. Suggesting standards and tools, this has to be done together with the worldwide community. This cannot be done by a legal entity or by one single operating body. Fair evaluator could be done, could be outsourced. There's many organizations, several, not many, several organizations out there that could play a role here. Improving the interoperability can only be done, again, together with the community. If you want to create interoperability, you need at least 2 nodes in order to start the interoperability. One node cannot even prove the interoperability. Interoperability board, yes, there should be one, supported by and shared maybe by the EOSC Association or by this legal entity, but of course composed of the nodes and the community. And seeking alignment with the rest of the world, this interoperability board, European or EOSC interoperability board, could play an important role there. The entrusted legal entity to operate this and to run grants, yes, we could do that in the future, but not today. We need to be equipped for that. Financing, not an unimportant issue in this whole discussion. First of all, we have in the countries the different systems that are financed by the countries. And in these systems, we can find, let's say, nuclei, or some cases even existing nodes, for example, in existing research infrastructures. These could be members of the association, and national nodes can be thematic nodes, can be purely national nodes, can be nodes into another system, a European system that are in a certain country, and they could become a member, okay, there it is, of the association, and that could be part of the financing for the association in the future system. Of course, part of the financing still has to come from the European Commission, and in our view, this could gradually decrease over time, where the involvement of the countries financially could gradually increase over time. These countries also have, let's say, their input through their researchers and through their money in what is called the international or RI nodes, the research infrastructure nodes that could come from the organizations that are financed by these countries. And again, they could be members of the association and jointly form the governance for EOSC A 3.0. Then the EOSC EU node. As I said, this is task 1 and task 2, and for the time being to be financed from the Commission. But gradually, if we can show that this EOSC EU node is offering something to the community will start to be involved and be prepared to pay for it. From the membership fee and a mixture from the European Union money, projects could be financed, as I said, through the development program task 4, and these could contribute to developing the system, the federation, further. This should actually then be the federation rather than the EOSC EU node. And the federation is the whole of the plot. Of course, these projects are done by these nodes. These projects are done by the organizations in the different systems in the countries and across the countries. And there may be nodes outside of this system that are involved in that as well, in the projects. And with that, the assessment of the EOSC A option, of the option E, the EOSC Association Board proposes is here, but I'm not going to read it because it's too much. we assessed the effectiveness, we looked at the efficiency, and we have looked at the long-term commitment for stakeholders. And we come to the conclusion that this is an interesting model to be considered. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Karel. So I've seen some desperate faces during the presentation. Don't worry, we were aware of this. It's all new, so it's totally comprehensible. But I hope that you understood the point of all of this exercise that we are trying to do. So we have these 5 tasks that we can summarize. So we have a European node that needs to be maintained, operate, evolved. So that's one thing. The European node on its own doesn't work, so then we have all the federation to be created, and then we have all the policy and the fair part. So these tasks, there is an agreement, I would say at this point in time, that that's what we need to understand how to make work after 2027. And these options are our initial reflection. I would like to ask Michel to explain what is the process on how we want to try and take a decision on this, because I think it's important to clarify this aspect.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Yes, first I'd like to underline that this is an ongoing process. So there is no decision taken yet, and I don't think there will be any decision taken before next year. So this is just, I think this session is really a way to be transparent on the fact that we have an ongoing process involving the 3 parties of the current EOSC governance. So we are happy to see that the board of directors of the EOSC Association is already going forward with privileging one of the options, but this is not yet the situation in the Commission, nor I think with the member states. We still have to discuss further. To allow such a discussion, we really wanted to provide a clear level playing field, and that's why we are trying to provide a supporting document for the member states, for the associated countries involved in the EOSC steering board, for the EOSC Association, and for the Commission itself. So this is an ongoing process. This supporting document will probably be consolidated by the end of October, and we will have a first discussion between the 3 parties in Madrid again in about a month from now, in the end of November, actually. So this will be really a milestone to see where we are in 2 months. Yes, 1 + 1 means 2, yes, indeed. So this will be a clear milestone, but I think the consensus proposal that we want to achieve will take more time in the course of 2024.
Okay, thank you. So are there any questions then? Mark.
So Mark Dietrich, EGI. My apologies, I have not been part of all these no doubt fascinating conversations, so apologies for perhaps a stupid question. Listening to all the complicated proposals, they all sound complicated, so it seems that in anything from a governance standpoint you want to focus on a simple proposition, as simple as one as possible, in order to get people behind it. What seems very clear is that the EC and member states need to fund this. I don't see any other, all the options seem to have this capability or this feature. So the work required, or for example, I think it's 185 and 187, all require advanced work. But this advanced work needs to happen no matter what. And if you do this, then perhaps a simple governance structure, because you've even in the options D and E, require a lot of governance coordination, even if you split into your hybrid models. So why not take one path and figure it out and get the EC and the member states behind it? And the details of which tasks are in which pile and how you do it perhaps can be worked out later, but the most important thing is to get the funding lined up and a governance structure that matches that funding.
Volker.
Yes, I agree. It would be nice to have the most simple governance model at the end to operate that. But we have to consider also we kind of hesitate, for example, to abandon the work program in FP10. What would this mean if we abandon a work program for EOSC? It would mean that you have kind of a closed club which is running the EOSC, which is deciding or providing grants. It's not going to be as open, I would say, as something run by the European Commission, which has also mechanisms in place to help countries which are not so strong, to help countries or to help domains which are not so strongly involved yet, in order to push them to participate. And I think the board of directors of the association would say, for the time being, we don't have all the communities, all the actors involved in the association. We have to keep the door open. So this is something, of course, this makes it more complicated from the governance point of view, but personally, I think that's a very strong value we have, the work program. And I really would like to still consider this option, because that's a very big value for the research communities. And communities are used to answer to framework program calls.
Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, to answer to Mark, I agree with you as well. But the most important thing to integrate is the integration of the operation and the development. And this is 1, 2, and 4. The others are very wide tasks. A creation of a web of fair data and services is everybody's task. It's not the only task of the Commission, but the Commission with a program can support that and can stimulate that development, as it has been stimulating it for the years in the past. As well as open science. This is a much broader task, again, for the whole community, for the whole of the world, actually, that is not in the remit of one organization to run it and to operate it and to do it. So therefore, we propose to combine the development task of the federation with the operation of the EOSC U-Node, and that integration, I agree with you, is extremely important.
Any other question? So 1, 2, 3. Okay. Oh, 4.
I have a rather short question. Could you please confirm that in an integrated model, only research organizations located in a participating member state are eligible for EU funding or for then funding, grants funding? Meaning in an integrated model, we have minimum requirement 40% of the member states participating in it, so that only those organizations being based in one of those 40% of the member states would be eligible for the funding.
That's correct, except for the quota that then the European Commission has, that is available for all the European researchers, but otherwise is correct. Other question there?
Yes, thank you, Carola Schulz. I'm here for Fires for Cancer. My question would be, do you have any examples of structures on EU level that already follow these governance models that you presented, both the integrated models following Articles 185 and 187, and or the hybrid models you presented?
Well, maybe for the integrated model, so for the Article 185, that's one example is the metrology partnership, so they are using this model. Article 187, the JU, the EUR-HPC joint undertaking. These are examples. For the hybrid, I'm not sure.
Well, the model we propose is inspired by Géant, and it's not literally exactly the same, but this is a type of an example of that of an organization that runs it that way. Yeah.
There was a question there first, in the back. Before it was over there.
Sarah, when you were discussing the different legal models initially, I'm not sure, maybe I missed the point, but I think you didn't mention intergovernmental organizations or ERICs. I mean, they might also serve as a model for to create a future legal entity to cope with the challenges and the requirements.
Yeah.
Was there a specific reason why this was left out?
Yeah, actually, so all the potential models were on the table at the very beginning, but then we had a meeting with the tripartite. It was in May, I think, where we had a sort of preliminary discussion with including all these models also that you are mentioning, also, for example, the EDIC, the new model. But it seemed that the members the results of that conversation was to focus more on these ones that we presented today, and that's why we haven't presented the others.
I think I like in this context, I'd like to highlight one issue. There is not, in terms of being eligible for funding, there might be issues with intergovernmental organizations to access funding through JUs in a particular context. I think that needs to be discussed in that context also.
Yeah, thanks for the good point. Question here, and then Roxanne after.
Hello, I am Nadia Vitsania from Eli Eric. I have more of a comment than a question. I have been in 2007 in ESFRE, where the ERIC regulation was drafted, and I was at the Competitiveness Council in 2009 when it was adopted under the Czech presidency of the council. And since then, 28 of them emerged and are working quite successfully. And I wanted also to say that the European research area is governed by a multi-level governance model, which means many actors are active: regions, ERICs, universities. This is the landscape. And now we are considering to have one organization under the Article 187 or 5 for managing and governing research data from almost all actors of the European research area. So I would really consider the maturity of the system first, and I would personally, not like Eli Eric, agree with Karel's model because it is emerging. It is not ready to be a single organization yet, to my opinion, and it is much more flexible than a single organization, and it allows also freedom of action to the other or to the actors and stakeholders of the European research area. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There was another question there.
Thank you. Thank you for the clear presentation. In all of the governance models, I'm kind of missing the voice of the research performing organizations. I'm from KU Leuven, from the University of Leuven in Belgium, so for me, of course, it's important. You could say, okay, it has to happen via the member states then, that are representing their local stakeholders. Unfortunately, it doesn't always happen as efficiently in every country. So I'm wondering on how you plan to deal with that, whether there will be some rules put in place to make sure that there's a stakeholder consultations on those national and regional levels with these research performing organizations, because those are the users of, I think, in the future, the EOSC.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Does any of you want to comment? Volker?
Well, I mean, the external entity can be something like the EOSC association representing the RPOs, the RFOs, the service providers. So there is a space for the community in the models.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, I think whatever option would be retained, in any case, we need a steering by those who will be funding this EOSC ecosystem, and we need, of course, a strong scientific voice because we want to develop a user-driven EOSC. So yes, I mean, from one option to another one, there is always the need to have this user-driven dimension to be represented in the steering of the whole initiative. So I think there is room for this in any of the options. That's my message. Now, again, we should not compare EOSC to an ERIC. I think EOSC is about an ecosystem approach where you have many infrastructures that can contribute and align within this ecosystem. So I think EOSC is very peculiar compared to the many research infrastructure we know being at European, national, or institutional level. So because of this peculiarity, probably we need some kinds of blueprint governance for the EOSC itself.
Thank you. Last two questions. So I have one question here and one there, and then we need to wrap up.
Okay, as for this task 3, 4, and 5, and leaving that to the Horizon Europe work program, don't you thereby leave the main problem unsolved? That is the sustainability problem of all these projects. So that's business as today. And you also don't get the requested member states buy-in and commitment.
Yes, if you would separate 3, 4, and 5 from 1 and 2, you're right. If you do not separate 4 from 1 and 2, then you automatically will, let's say, involve projects that lead to developments of the tasks 1 and 2 or to the federated system. Again, task 3 and 5 are much wider than only developing EOSC.
I would say that the fact that we will have tasks 1 and 2, so meaning concretely having a central EU node being sustained and a federation expanding of infrastructure nodes contributing to the whole, will provide an exploitation context for any new services being developed through R&I typical activities. But a grant remains a grant, and a grant is there to produce foreground. And it has a term. So you will not change the rules of the game. This is a usual limitation of a grant approach through calls for proposals. The difference is that we will have an exploitation context for the outcome of those research and innovation activities.
Okay, thank you. Very last question.
Okay, so I wonder if we are targeted to the decision on the legal structure or governance of the system. My question is if it is enough clear the purpose of the organization to take the decision on governance. So the technical, if I talk about what I better know, that is the ERICS also, you have to have a very clear description of all the things that you have to do before thinking in a legal structure. What are the members? What are all the details? And I wonder that if it is so clear here, is it enough clear for taking the decision on governance? This is my doubt, because this morning, for instance, when we see the presentation of the nodes, for instance, the concept of nodes, it was not totally clear. So at the member state level, we need to have the clarity on how we can contribute to the construction of these nodes before to enter in the details or in the selection of a governance model. And I'm afraid that, I don't know, because maybe I'm not totally inside of the process for the decision. But I think that we need to do that before taking the decision on governance. And from my point of view, still, we have a lot of doubts. So in this sense, I will support a flexible model, as probably as Michel presented, something like we can use as a blueprint to decide finally what is the governance that we have to get for the EOS, but in the future, not today.
Thank you. Anyone wants to?
Yes, so as you say, I think that this hybrid model, we also thought of that because it allows flexibility, right? It's not a closed club, it still has the work program. We can still, as member states, influence the work program as we go. But at the same time, we have to take some decisions soon, what we are going to propose after Horizon Europe. So if we don't take a decision, then this is not an option, right?
Trying to delay, but take the decision with basis. And I think that my feeling is that we still miss some additional information in order to be supported for this.
Want to? No.
Okay, but I think, I mean, it's a very valid point, and I think that that's why they remarked that this is an ongoing process. So we are fully aware that we don't have all the answers. And that's also why we are here in these days and try to speed up the discussion, because we really need a change of speed here to make sure that we will have in place something functional and useful after 2027. But that's clearly a very valid point. Okay, we are definitely run out of time. So I would like to thank all my speakers and panelists. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm thanking myself as well. Okay, and we reached the end of the day. So I hope you really enjoyed the first day of the symposium. Just a reminder, so we have the social event tonight at El Jardín de Arzabal. And we have two groups leaving at the hotel, one at 7:15 and one at 7:30 in the lobby. So if you want to join one of those groups, be in the lobby at that time. Otherwise, I will see you there. And don't forget dancing shoes, okay? Thank you.